Every historical mystery begins with a document. But what happens when the document tells a lie? Not a small, careless error, but a foundational, century-spanning impossibility. We are in the year 2025, and within these forgotten government archives, a researcher was cataloging the land deeds of colonial America. Most were dry, routine. But then, he found one that made the blood run cold. The deed was for a small coastal settlement in New England, establishing its official town charter. It was dated unequivocally August 16, 1692, a time of terrifying upheaval, a time of panic, paranoia, and the deadly shadow of the supernatural. The town was named Fairweather. Fairweather, Massachusetts, established in 1692, right when the notorious Salem Witch Trials were tearing the region apart. Yet, as the researcher dug further, the mystery deepened into an anomaly. There were no subsequent records. No tax records in 1700. No census data in 1750. No mention of citizens fighting in the Revolutionary War. For 3 centuries, it was as if the town had been swallowed whole. Historians had always dismissed Fairweather as a short-lived settlement, perhaps destroyed by a storm or illness, its records lost. But the original charter, so clear, so meticulously detailed, suggested otherwise. It implied a robust, established community. Why did they leave no trace? The answer came not from history, but from disaster. In 2022, a devastating wildfire tore through a remote coastal section of the same region. The fire burned away the thick, protective overgrowth of centuries. And when the smoke cleared, the world saw something that should not exist. There it was. Fairweather, not ruins, but a town, perfectly preserved beneath the ash. Log cabins, a meeting house, a general store. It was as if the residents had simply stepped away for lunch and never returned. But the greatest mystery was not its disappearance or its reemergence. It was the simple, chilling fact that every single detail, every structure, every artifact screamed the year 1692. This town didn't age. This town slept. And the dark reason why its residents vanished is hidden in the very soil of Fairweather. When the first archaeological teams entered Fairweather, they weren't walking into ruins. They were walking into a set piece, a pristine window into the 17th century, undisturbed by the passage of time. The scene was eerily domestic. Clothes hung on lines, now brittle. A loaf of bread sat on a windowsill, petrified. Every artifact was exactly where its owner left it, centuries ago. The air itself felt heavy, stagnant. The clock stopped not just in time, but in the moment. Based on the artifacts, the last recorded activity was a single, terrifying day in late August 1692. They didn't evacuate, they simply stopped. The researchers found no mass graves, no signs of battle, no evidence of plague. New evidence of plague. The residents of Fairweather had vanished without a trace, but it was in the office of the town magistrate, Elder Thomas Croft, that the mystery truly twisted. Beneath a pile of hastily scribbled notes, the team found an object that should not exist in 1692. It was small, made of glass and metal, and perfectly preserved in the dry, ash-covered room. This was no colonial artifact. It was a fragment of something advanced, something chemical. And beside it, they found the magistrate's personal diary. Its final, panicked entry would change the entire focus of the investigation. The entry was dated August 22, 1692. A week after the town charter was signed. The air is heavy, the noise it is not sound, but pressure. It stops the clock in the mind. Croft's wife is taken to sleeping with a knife. The stranger, he asks too many questions about the rock in the pasture. We pray God shield us from the static, the noise that stops the mind, and the mention of the stranger and a mysterious rock. This was not the language of the witch trials. This was the language of an unexplained, potentially hostile phenomenon. Whatever caused Fairweather to stop, it was not the devil, but something scientific, mechanical, or maybe even alien. The time capsule had a secret, and it was rooted not in the Puritan faith, but in a field just outside the settlement. The magistrate's cryptic reference to the rock in the pasture was the first physical clue to the town's paralysis. Historians suspected it might refer to a large glacial erratic common in New England, but the scientific team had a different idea. had a different idea. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team scanned the overgrown field mentioned in the 1692 diary. And what they found was not a boulder, but a massive subterranean anomaly. It was perfectly uniform, dense, and unnaturally smooth, a feature entirely inconsistent with natural geology. Shrewy. This was the core of the mystery. The source of the static that stopped the clocks in the minds of Fairweather's residents. It was too big to be removed, so the team had to dig. What they uncovered was astonishing. Not a rock, but a structure. It was a colossal, perfectly geometric monolith, 20 feet in diameter, buried deep in the American earth. Its material was unlike anything native to the region. It seemed to absorb light. The monolith emitted no heat, no radiation, and contained no detectable circuits or power source. Yet, the moment the team touched it with their specialized testing equipment, the devices began to malfunction. The static had returned. Geologists dated the soil layers around the object, confirming it had been resting there for centuries, predating the arrival of the Fairweather settlers. This was not a colonial device. This was something ancient, something unearthly. Back in the town, a secondary discovery confirmed their darkest suspicions. Beneath the floorboards of the general store, the town's hub, they found a second journal. This one was smaller, wrapped tightly in oilskin. It belonged to the man Magistrate Croft had called the stranger. The stranger's journal detailed his arrival in Fairweather just weeks before its disappearance. He wrote with an educated scientific hand, referring to the monolith not as a rock, but as an energy sink. It is not dormant. It is a beacon, drawing something to this patch of earth. The noise is not sound, but a localized energy field. When it fully activates, it will not erase the town. It will preserve it. But the preservation comes at a price far greater than death. Stranger understood the monolith's purpose. But if the town was preserved, where were the people? And what was the terrifying price he alluded to? The answer was contained in the stranger's final, desperate drawing, an image that would finally explain why no one ever searched for Fairweather. The stranger's journal provided the most crucial piece of evidence. His final page was not a written entry, but a technical, yet panicked, diagram. It showed the monolith in the center of Fairweather, surrounded by concentric rings. The stranger understood the monolith as a device, an energy sink that consumed ambient energy, but also a frequency emitter that radiated outward. The core of its effect was not physical stasis, but something far more insidious, perceptual shielding, and... The diagram suggested that the monolith generated a massive, localized distortion field. This field didn't hide the town physically. It hid the idea of the town. This explained the historical anomaly. Fairweather wasn't destroyed by flood or fire. It was rendered invisible to memory. Imagine a colonial scout or a surveyor passing within sight of the settlement. They would see the buildings, the church, perhaps even smoke rising from a chimney. But the moment they left the monolith's radius, their mind would scrub the data. The memory of Fairweather simply vanished. The initial government records existed only because the charter was signed before the monolith fully activated. Once the device was fully engaged, which the stranger's journal suggests happened on August 22, 1692, the town became a living ghost. It was there, but its existence could not be permanently registered by any outside human mind. This wasn't a time capsule for the town itself, but a prison for its memory. This chilling revelation answered why the town was forgotten. But it did nothing to explain where the people went. Or, more disturbing, what the stranger was doing there in the first place. The team needed to know who the stranger was. His knowledge of advanced physics and energy fields was centuries ahead of the Puritan era. He was clearly an outsider, but from what time and what place? Underneath the floorboards, the team found a small, corroded brass object, an identification plaque. It bore no name, but a symbol. A stylized, three-pronged star deeply etched into the metal, and beneath the star an inscription ATF Site Gamma, Temporal Observation Unit. 2351. The stranger was not a lost colonial. He was an operative from the future, a temporal observer from the year 2351, and his presence in 1692 suggested that the monolith, the energy sink, was not an accident of nature, but a highly sensitive, perhaps dangerous, object that demanded temporal surveillance. The sleeping town of Fairweather was the result of a catastrophic time travel accident. But what was the monolith protecting? And what happened to the observer, Unit 2351? The discovery of the Temporal Observation Unit's ID plaque changes everything. Fairweather is no longer just a forgotten colonial settlement. It is the site of a devastating temporal incident. The question now becomes, what was the operative from 2351, the stranger, trying to prevent? According to the cryptic notes in the journal, the monolith, the energy sink, was originally intended to be a temporal anchor, a fixed point in time used for observation. But something went catastrophically wrong. Instead of anchoring time, the device began to drain ambient energy from its surroundings. The stranger's last entry suggested the monolith was amplifying the fear and hysteria gripping the region, acting like a lens focused on the already volatile atmosphere of 1692. The tension was building to a historical breaking point. The year 1692 was defined by the deadly chaos of the Salem Witch Trials, occurring just 50 miles away from Fairweather. The panic was driven by superstition, religious fear, and, as the stranger theorized, a potential energy distortion caused by the monolith. The monolith's static, the noise that stopped the mind, was amplifying the residents' existing fears. Their paranoia wasn't just religious. It was a physical side effect. They weren't seeing witches. They were hallucinating due to the monolith's energy field. The final, agonizing entry in Magistrate Croft's journal, the one referencing the static, also contained a phrase that historians had initially dismissed as Puritan zealotry. The air burns with their fear. The devil feeds the machine. The residents believed the monolith was an artifact of the devil, feeding off the spiritual energy of their panic. The stranger, the temporal observer, realized the truth. The monolith was feeding off their emotional energy, converting fear into raw power. The stranger's primary mission was containment, to stabilize the monolith and prevent its energy field from causing a temporal cascade. He devised a crude chemical countermeasure, likely the contents of the shattered glass vial found earlier. But the chemical failed. The monolith's energy discharge was too fast, too powerful. The stranger's final attempt at neutralization triggered the disaster. On August 22, 1692, the monolith went critical. It didn't explode. Instead, it achieved a state of perfect localized equilibrium, consuming the entire town's ambient energy and collapsing its perceptual field. The town was preserved in a state of suspended animation. But what about the people? Did they simply freeze in time? Or did the monolith, in its final catastrophic act, do something far worse to the inhabitants of Fairweather? The physical truth lay hidden in the most sacred ground, the cemetery. When a colonial town vanishes, you expect to find a graveyard. And Fairweather had won, but the cemetery, unlike the town itself, was untouched by the monolith's stasis. The stones were weathered, the dates stretching from the 1650s up to the crucial year of 1692. The town's last death was recorded just 3 months before the monolith activated. But what about the people who vanished on August 22nd? If the preservation field had frozen them in time, they should have been found inside the homes, frozen mid-motion. But the town was empty. Completely empty. The only sign of the population, the magistrate, the shopkeeper, the families, was evidence of a hurried mass burial in the cemetery grounds, conducted just days before the monolith went critical. Using historical maps and forensic archaeology, the team located the hastily prepared mass graves. They found rough, simple pine coffins, around 50 of them, enough to account for the entire known population of Fairweather. The question was impossible. Why would the town bury itself just days before it vanished? When the first coffin was opened, the truth was immediately, horrifyingly clear. Inside, there was no flesh, no skeleton. The coffins were filled only with the clothing of the deceased, folded neatly and meticulously preserved, along with a few personal effects, a locket, a pair of worn shoes. The physical bodies of the residents of Fairweather were missing. The realization was unavoidable, and it aligned perfectly with the stranger's notes on the monolith being an energy sink. The stasis field, the perceptual shield, the preserved clothes. It wasn't a time capsule, it was a storage unit. The monolith did not freeze the people. It consumed their biological matter. It drained the raw material of their bodies to achieve and maintain its perfect time stasis state, leaving only the clothes and the residual emotional fear. The remaining citizens, the ones who dug the hasty graves, had somehow witnessed this horrific process, burying the idea of their loved ones before the monolith's full activation consumed them as well. This explained the final, terrifying entry from the stranger. The operative from 2351, who faced a mission failure that cost him everything. The stranger's final fate was not to escape, but to become part of the monolith's harvest. His body, his temporal gear, his advanced technology, all reduced to the silent energy needed to power the perceptual veil that hid Fairweather for 3 centuries. But the stranger left one last, crucial clue that would reveal where his essence was trapped and how the entire horror could be reversed. The empty coffins confirmed the horrific fate of the Fairweather residents. Their biological matter was harvested to power the monolith's perceptual shield, but the monolith only consumed the physical. The consciousness and emotional imprint of the townspeople might still be trapped within the energy field. The key to accessing this frozen mental imprint lay in the final object the team found. An antique colonial pocket watch, seized from the stranger's remains before his body was consumed. Crucially, the watch was not colonial. It was an advanced temporal tuning device disguised as a 17th century artifact. The team theorized the monolith created a frequency window, a static barrier that allowed them to enter the town, but blocked any communication with the outside world. The stranger's watch was designed to tune into that exact frequency. The modern team realized they didn't need to destroy the monolith. They needed to interrogate it. They connected the stranger's watch to a highly sensitive audio receiver, attempting to isolate the frequency of the perceptual shield. The effect was immediate and chilling. The ambient hum that had always pervaded Fairweather, the static that Magistrate Croft wrote about, suddenly resolved itself into sound. The monolith was not just a shield, it was a recording device. Trapped within its energy signature was the final, terrifying sensory experience of the townspeople, the soundscape of their last, panicked moments before the collapse. As the technician fine-tuned the dial, the static cleared. They didn't just hear the final minutes of Fairweather. They heard the stranger's final message. I failed. The monolith requires biomass for phase lock. It used the people. But the lock is not complete. The temporal anchor is still transmitting a signal. A loop. It is sending the town's moment of fear back to 1692. It is feeding the Salem paranoia. You must break the loop. The core, the monolith, must be reversed. The horrifying truth was clear. The monolith wasn't just a physical time capsule. It was broadcasting the raw emotion of its inhabitants' final fear back through time, potentially fueling the hysteria that led to the Salem Witch Trials. The sleeping town was secretly infecting history. The only way to stop it was to reverse the monolith's polarity. But the stranger's voice cut out before he could provide the final, critical instructio. The temporal observer, the stranger, had vanished along with his colleagues, his final warning trapped forever in the monolith's energy field. The modern team knew their window was closing. The longer the fear loop continued, the more damage it would inflict on the fragile timeline of 1692. The stranger mentioned a temporal anchor still transmitting. The team theorized that before the monolith consumed his body, he must have prepared a final physical instruction kit. Using the 3-pronged star symbol from his ID plaque as a reference, they scanned the magistrate's office. Behind a faded colonial map, a tiny, almost invisible compartment was revealed. The stranger's concealed temporal field kit. The data slate contained the stranger's final operational plan, the reversal protocol. It was a complex series of commands designed to shift the monolith's energy polarity from consumption stasis to discharge release. The danger was astronomical. The monolith had been collecting biomass energy for over 300 years. If the release was uncontrolled, the energy, containing the concentrated consciousness and fear of the entire town, would discharge with the force of a nuclear explosion, wiping Fairweather and the surrounding modern area off the map. The monolith had to be reversed slowly, using a controlled physical interface. The team had only one chance to enter the commands precisely and manually, and the control port was located where the stranger had first encountered the artifact, at the very top of the monolith. The team identified the access point, a small recessed groove on the monolith's surface, designed for the temporal field kit. But as the technician was lowered, the whispers from the monolith intensified. The monolith was fighting back. The stored consciousness of Fairweather was manifesting a final, desperate defense. The technician wasn't just battling static. He was battling 300 years of preserved, amplified Puritan terror. He had reached the surface of the black object. His hand, clutching the temporal field kit, reached for the recess. But just as his fingers touched the cold surface, a final guttural scream was heard over the audio receiver. The collective, preserved agony of every single soul consumed by the machine. And the monolith suddenly did something it hadn't done in 3 centuries. It began to move. The monolith was moving. After 3 centuries of perfect stasis, the massive object shifted, grinding against the earth. It wasn't physical movement. It was the monolith's core struggling against the reversal protocol, desperately trying to maintain its power equilibrium. The technician, now exposed to the unfiltered fear loop, was momentarily paralyzed. The sound was no longer just static. It was the direct, agonizing thoughts of the citizens of Fairweather. Panic over the devil, fear of starvation, the terror of their flesh dissolving. It takes the breath. The light. The black bile is rising. We are forfeit. Using sheer determination, the technician slammed the field kit into the access port. The connection was made. The control room screamed out the data. The monolith's energy levels were spiking, then plummeting, a terrifying sign of the polarity shift. The reversal protocol was active. The monolith was commanded to stop consuming and start discharging. But the discharge wouldn't be an explosion of raw energy. It was engineered to be a controlled release of the trapped consciousness and memory. The monolith's protective perceptual shield, the veil of forgetfulness, flickered and died. For the first time in 333 years, the town of Fairweather was truly visible to the world. The silence was absolute. The energy sink was inert. The fear loop was broken. Fairweather was finally physically and perceptually back in the present day. The first relief was quickly replaced by a profound, eerie silence. The monolith was just a huge, inert structure of unknown metal. The town remained perfectly preserved, 1692, frozen in time. But the true consequence of the reversal was not physical. It was historical and psychological. The monolith had not only discharged the mental trauma of the Fairweather residents, but it had also released the memory of the town into the global consciousness. Across the country, historians, mapmakers, and census workers suddenly felt a jarring, cold sense of déjà vu. An entire detailed memory of a town they had never known had been violently inserted into their minds. Fairweather was no longer forgotten. The world was now aware of the terrible price paid for this real-life time capsule. The temporal horror was over. The sleeping town was awake. But the deepest mystery remained unsolved. If the monolith consumed the people's bodies, reducing them to energy, what became of the stranger's temporal equipment? And could the people's consciousness ever be truly free? The last piece of evidence was waiting inside the monolith's silent core. The perceptual veil was gone. The fear loop was broken. The town of Fairweather, frozen in 1692, stood exposed to the modern world. But the final fate of the residents and the temporal observer, the stranger, remained an open wound. The monolith had served its purpose as an energy sink, harvesting biomass to achieve stasis. The team's final act was to take a core sample from the structure's center, where the monolith's energy was at its densest. The result was not metal or stone or biological residue. It was a perfectly polished, glassy cylinder that shimmered with an internal light. Within the cylinder, under microscopic examination, the team found the impossible, a miniature, 3-dimensional snapshot. The monolith did not destroy the people. It converted their physical form into pure, concentrated data, the bodies of every resident, including the temporal observer from 2351, were not merely consumed. They were compressed into a state of eternal, digital preservation. The townspeople of Fairweather were not in the past, nor were they physically present in the modern age. They were trapped inside the core sample, a living eternal snapshot of August 22, 1692. They had been reduced to the ultimate perfect time capsule. The stranger's final act was successful, yet terrifying. He broke the fear loop, saving history, but he himself became an indelible part of the exhibit. The town that slept for 300 years remains, in its essence, a collection of silent prisoners, forever frozen in a moment of sheer terror. Fairweather stands today as a monument to desperation, temporal ambition, and the horrifying truth that time itself can be weaponized. We began with a single document, a simple date. We ended with a truth that defies science and history. If this dark American mystery, blending colonial panic with chilling science fiction, unsettled you, then you need to join our community. Hit the like button and subscribe now so you don't miss our next deep dive. I want to know, if you could access the consciousness trapped in the Monolith's core, what single question would you ask the people of Fairweather? Tell me in the comments below. Next time, we investigate the shocking secrets of a forgotten Soviet bunker, the Siberian sleep experiment. Did they really wake up? Until then, remember that the past is never truly dead. It's just waiting to be awakened.